But it's a thrill to see everyone here on a Friday morning, and I appreciate your having the interest to join us this morning with a really exceptional person, a real exceptional doctor, and a real exceptional leader. We're thrilled to have Dr. Ralph Northam with us this morning, and I deliberately used his title, which I believe is probably preferred, although he may not say that publicly, of doctor. He is a doctor, and that's who he is. But he's also the Lieutenant Governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, and I see a lot of our Virginians here, and I think it's important for people to, as our identity, although this main campus is located here in the District of Columbia, our reach and our doctors, nurses, our partners, other health systems go deep into Virginia, and we care for so many patients from there and have such great relationships, particularly with our sister children's hospital, the King's Daughters down in Norfolk, Virginia, where Dr. Northam is on the faculty. And if you didn't know it, I'm going to tell you now. He's a pediatric neurologist. I've been working on him to see if he would, Dr. Packer was working on him to see if he would join our staff. He's also the proud father of a physician who's doing his training down in North Carolina, and probably one of the finest academic institutions I know of, because parenthetically I went to the University of North Carolina. But he's studying, he's doing his residency in pediatric neurosurgery, or neurosurgery there. We hope he'll be a pediatric neurosurgeon now. And talking to Dr. Northam, I hope we'll comment on it, but he has been at Children's. He's been a doctor at Children's. He's taken care of patients at Children's. And we were speculating that I may have given him a hard time when he was a resident here. But way back. But he's had a long and distinguished career as a physician, and then moving into politics, governance, was a state senator, and has advocated continuously and passionately for many things, but what really is close to our hearts is children. He appointed me to a commission on childhood success, which was just amazing, and the people that he brought together to look at what we could do better, not just in healthcare, but in education, and all of the things that influence and impact children, as we know. So we're honored to have him here at Children's National. I'm going to take a little bit of a sidelight. There is probably some buzz, and I think it's even been announced that he is not only Lieutenant Governor, but is running for governor. And although we're on video here, so I have to be careful. But my big smile, smile can tell you a lot of things. My big smile can tell you a lot of things, and we're just thrilled to have him here and share with us some of his thoughts about where we are with medicine and society. So thank you very much, Ralph.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Well, good morning and good afternoon. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. And we were here together. I remember you. I won't tell all of our war stories, but most of the times were good times. But what an asset you have to have him. He's been here so long and been a part of this wonderful institution. It is more thrilling than I can tell you to be back here at Children's National. Believe it or not, I was here in 1988. I was a pediatric neurology fellow over at Walter Reed in Washington, and there was a relationship that was established between Walter Reed and Children's National. So I actually came over here and did 3 months of my pediatric neurosurgery training within Dr. Johnson and Dr. McCullough, for those of you that perhaps have been around the hospital for a while. But just what a wonderful experience that was. I was telling Dr. Newman, I think they probably let us do more as fellows than perhaps they would in this day and age. And I know we have an attorney in here with us, so she said we're on tape, so careful what we say. But I want to just tell you, I came here, and there were 2 pediatric neurosurgery fellows, or residents, I guess, who were doing their rotation. And what they told me is that if I prove myself to be safe, that after a couple of weeks, they would put me in the call rotation, because these 2 were on every other night. And I know we have some residents and students here. If you remember, or if you're experiencing that now, every other night call will wear you down in a hurry. Well, the very day that I got here, one of the residents came down with an illness. And it was actually a fairly serious illness, and he was out for 2 weeks. And that left one resident. And, of course, the attending said, well, what are we going to do about this? So they actually put me on the call rotation every other night for a couple of weeks. And I tell you, you talk about jumping into the deep end, but it was just a great experience. And I learned so much here. Just the staff and just working here was just so enjoyable. I remember actually a case, believe it or not, of a child that was was kind of at like a little league or a rec baseball game, and was hit in the head with a baseball bat, no helmet on, anyway, and was very seriously ill. Started posturing and came in and was intubated. You all know the story, but rushed into the operating room, and Dr. Johnson at that time actually let me put the burr holes in, pull the flap off, evacuate the hematoma. It was epidural hematoma. Essentially saved that child's life. But what I remember is that as they were getting ready to close, the brain literally was coming out of the skull cavity. And Dr. Johnson said to the anesthesiologist, have you done anything different here? What's going on? And he said, well, I let the CO2 come back up to 40. And he said, well, please take it back down to 30. And just right before our eyes, as the anesthesiologist increased the rate on the ventilator, the brain just went right back into the cavity. So anyway, the experiences that we have over the years just are so memorable. So again, it is a pleasure to be back here. What I want to do is just talk a little bit about this morning of my experience as a pediatric neurologist, and then how that has evolved into policy making. So we're going to roll through this, and I will try to take some time at the end, if we have a little bit of time, to answer some questions. But I think the first question that people often ask me, Ralph, why would a pediatric neurologist who Pam and I have raised 2 children, why would a pediatric neurologist want to get into politics? And I don't know if there are any psychiatrists in the audience, but yes, ma'am, thank you. Can we speak? I'd like to talk to you afterwards. And then as far as I'd like to talk about a job here too, so if there's anybody else that can help me with that. But to the students and residents here, imagine this scenario. You finish your training and you do a fellowship, pediatric neurologist. You've been seeing patients for 10 years, and you have a 5-year-old come into your office with a type of epilepsy that you recognize as familial, genetically determined epilepsy. We understand that you're known now, so you send a genetic test, a marker, and sure enough, it's a specific type of epilepsy. And through personalized healthcare and through data collection and data analysis, you know exactly what type of epilepsy it is. You know exactly the correct medicine to use, let's say Vimpat. And so you write a prescription to your patient, you tell them the side effects and just wish them the best. And and they go to the pharmacy, and the pharmacy looks at the prescription, and then they contact the insurance agency, or agent rather, and they say, well, you know what, you need to use 2 other medicines first and try them and fail before you can use the Vimpat. And let's just say, in this case, you need to use Tegretol, and then you need to use valproic acid before you can use exactly what you know as a clinician who's been practicing medicine for 10 years. That was the frustration that I had back in 2006. And so I went in to talk to my chairman one morning. It was one of those annual meetings where you say, you know, how are your grants doing, and our research is coming along well. And anyway, I went in there and I said, you know what, I'm really frustrated. We're working hard, seeing more patients. I don't have a whole lot to show for it at the end of the day. It's just very frustrating right now to practice medicine. And he was a man of few words, and he said, well, Ralph, why don't you do something about it? So I walked out, and I started thinking about it, and I said, well, maybe I do need to try to take this to another level. So any of those of you out here that are interested in going into politics, the first step is to talk to your spouse, okay? That's very, very important. I would strongly recommend that. And then, you know, I talked to my partners, and I just told them that there were a lot of things that I felt passionate about, and you know, this was an opportunity I thought to kind of shape our children's future. And also, at the end of the day, we all need to protect our profession. We need to make sure that we continue to attract the brightest, the most energetic people that want to go into healthcare. So I was totally naive politically, and some people say maybe you still are. But anyway, I decided to throw my hat in the ring, and that was in 2007. And I actually talked to a caucus leader. I'm a Democrat. We didn't come here to talk politics this morning, but I told him, I said, I'm interested in running for the state senate, and what kind of money would this take to run a competitive campaign in what was the 6th district, which is the Eastern Shore, which is where I'm from, and then Norfolk, and a couple other little areas. And he didn't know me from Adam, and I think he was really trying to talk me out of it. And he said, well, it's going to cost you probably about $250,000. I said, well, I know all these rich doctors. That shouldn't be a problem. So, anyway, long story short, that was a $1.2 million campaign. I ran against an 8-year incumbent. I ran again in 11. It was a little bit easier the second time around. And then in 2013, I ran for lieutenant governor, and here I am. And I would just say that it's important, I think, for us as healthcare providers to be at the table. There are a lot of moving parts in healthcare right now. So if anybody is interested in kind of going down this path, don't ever hesitate to call me. I'll be glad to try to help you navigate through this. I just wanted to take very brief, and I'm not here to give you a lesson in civics this morning, but in Virginia, we meet, our legislature meets in January and February. And just to give you kind of an example of how things move through the General Assembly, I went to Richmond in 2008. I figured it's kind of like you've heard the analogy that just because you have an MD behind your name as you graduate from medical school doesn't mean that you know a whole lot about taking care of patients. Well, I had a senator in front of my name now, but didn't mean I knew a whole lot about policy making. So I figured I'd go to Richmond and keep a low profile and make good relationships and learn the system. And so literally the second day after I was sworn in, the governor, at that time Governor Kane, came to me and he said, Ralph, I have traveled around the Commonwealth, and he said people would really like to be able to go into a restaurant and not be exposed to other people's cigarette smoke. And he said, you as a pediatrician would be a good person to carry that type of legislation. So if you can imagine the tremendous amount of influence that the tobacco industry has had over the years, over the history of Virginia, but you know, when the governor says, you know, will you do something, you say yes sir or yes ma'am. So I wrote the legislation. It went into a subcommittee. It passed in the Senate subcommittee, and then went to the floor of the Senate. We debated it on the floor of the Senate. And really at that time, the argument against this was, well, Ralph, that's too much government in our lives. The government shouldn't be telling businesses, how they should run their business. And I said, I get that, but, you know, it's really the government's responsibility to protect people. And we know that people will die in the Commonwealth of Virginia from repeated exposure to cigarette smoke. So anyway, it passed in the Senate, and then once it passes in the Senate, it has to go back and you start all over in the House. There are 100 delegates. Start in the subcommittee, go through the committee, and anyway, it passed in the Senate, and as we say in Richmond, it caught a bit of a fever when it went down to the House. And again, their argument was that it was too much government in our lives, and so it didn't pass. I went back the next year. I worked with people from both sides of the aisle. I explained to them what cigarette smoke did to people, and anyway, long story short, the second year it passed in the Senate, passed in the House, and then Governor King signed it into law. So that's the way an idea starts from an advocacy perspective, and then works through the General Assembly to become a law. These are some things that I have worked on over the years. I mentioned the restaurant smoking ban. Matthew's law was actually a third grader. I like to go out and talk to the students in schools, and he actually said, you know, Dr. Northam, when I get in a car, I put on my seatbelt, and then my mother, and this is nothing against mothers, by the way, my mother lights up a cigarette, and it, you know, gets my eyes start running and or itching and nose running, etc. And he said, can you pass a law that says when a child is in a motor vehicle, that there can be no smoking? And I said, well, Matthew, you know, as a pediatrician and knowing what we deal with reactive airway disease, otitis media, and sudden infant death, I said, that's a great idea. So I presented that bill. It actually passed in the Senate. It went to the House, and so my friends in the House said, you know, Ralph, last year you said we can't smoke in restaurants. This year you're trying to tell us we can't smoke in the car. What's it going to be next year? We can't smoke in our own house. I said, yeah, maybe. We'll get that far. But anyway, that didn't pass for a couple of years, and then this past year, actually, it was not me because I can't prevent legislation anymore, but it did pass. And it's not so much for, you know, writing a ticket to somebody, but it's an education tool and letting people know that it's really unhealthy to smoke in the car. Certainly, I've done work with a smoking ban at school. You know, students can't smoke, so why should the administration be able to smoke? So we stop that. I've done a lot of work with autism, making sure that we're able to diagnose autism at an early age and then help these children and families getting them into early therapy. I did a work the past few years with obesity. As you all know, about a third of our children in society are either overweight or obese, so we did a lot of work with physical education. Tort reform in Virginia, I won't get into, but we actually have a very good program in Virginia that gives people at least an idea of what's to be expected. It's out for 20 years, so we can project and prepare for the future. I'm going to talk about concussion some today, so I want to tell you about that. And then there's a tremendous amount of work now going on with mental health that I've been involved in, especially opioid addiction, which is not just a problem in Virginia, but it's a nationwide problem. So let's get into a little bit of clinical medicine this morning and tell you a little bit about concussion and what I've done to hopefully make our student athletes a bit safer in Virginia. But, you know, it's that time of year, it's the fall, and I'll just read this to you. The ritual begins in the sweltering heat of August with grueling twice-a-day workouts and the sound of full-force collisions between pads and helmets echoing across the practice field. As the leaves begin to change, the annual rite of passage that is high school football takes center stage in communities across Virginia. For the fans who faithfully gather every Friday night or Saturday afternoon, the bone-jarring hits generate unbridled excitement. But for the Warriors, these high-speed sledgehammer tackles carry the potential for a concussion, an injury that occurs when the brain is violently rocked back and forth inside the skull cavity. And I'm going to show you some videos this morning of some football injuries. But, you know, there are other sports as well that cause concussions. And just to make a couple points, soccer is up there, ice hockey, boxing, obviously, wrestling, And as the parent of a now 25-year-old young lady, cheerleaders, believe it or not, and I make the point to people that cheerleading has changed since I was coming along. It's no more just out there shaking the pom-poms. Now they like to throw the young ladies up into the air, and sometimes they're not quite as good at catching them as they are at throwing them. So we see a few young ladies, cheerleaders every year that have had concussion. So I think everybody can recognize this fellow. This is Tim Tebow. And for the students and the residents, I don't know if you can look at his face, but it's kind of, I describe it as the lights are on, but nobody's home. He has kind of lost touch with his surroundings, if you will, because of cortical dysfunction. And it's the same look that you'll see with an infant with meningitis. It's just when you see that look, you know that there's a problem. So let's just show you.
Taylor Wyndham, number 94, not a penalty, did not launch himself with his helmet. That was a good, clean hit. Took it right square in the chest, Mark. The entire.
Actually, I won't go through that again, but there are a couple of things. A helmet to his chin, that was the first thing that happened, and then on his way down, he actually got kicked in the back of the head. So he kind of had like a double whammy on that action. This one I really want to make a couple points, and I'm just going to play it one time, but these are 7-year-olds, okay? And I have that's my boy because sometimes we as fathers, think that our son is going to be the next NFL linebacker. And a couple problems with this. One, the helmets, as you will see in these children, when you can take a helmet and kind of spin it around, remember the pads and helmet that we had when we were growing up? That's not a good idea. The other thing, if you think about a 7-year-old, their neck is not developed to the point where they can support their head. So take a look at this one. And also listen, if you can, to initially the father's like, oh, what a great hit, and then it's like, ooh, that probably wasn't as good as maybe we thought it was. So let's watch this one.
Go stop him.
Go!
Oh my gosh. Go stop him.
Go!
Oh my gosh.
So you kind of hear that tone. This is a game between the University of Georgia and Auburn. And this, a point I would like to make to you all, despite having the best equipment that we've ever had, especially in helmets, our athletes now are so well conditioned. They're faster, they're stronger, they're larger, and no matter what kind of equipment you have them in, the acceleration, deceleration injury is difficult to prevent.
It's a very long 1 yard. Play fake, Green. Reggie Brown. Popped by Junior Rose Green. He's down. The ball is out. They're calling this a fumble. They sure are. Reggie Brown is still down. It was Junior Rose Green again. He had the penalty earlier. This was a clean hit.
So we're doing better with no more helmet to helmets, but this is just, there's no way with that kind of speed, again coming across the middle, that the human brain is just not designed to take that. This is an interesting video, and this is not so much of a head injury as this is a spinal cord injury. And sometimes even in Little League, in middle school and high school, people think it's a good idea to hurdle. But when you hurdle, you're up in the air with no control. So watch what happens. And then for the residents and students, this athlete actually has a decorticate posturing once he hits the field. So take a look at this.
Touchdown, California! It's David O'Reilly, who landed on his back.
And he was up, he leaped to begin with, and then ended up
some freak injuries over the course of his career, from his hip to his foot. Last year he had a hyperextended elbow, and they're just the oddest type of injuries, usually around big plays.
Well, he hurdled the defender into the end zone and landed on his back.
He hurdled him and then got propelled up. These guys, when they come into running backs, he does a wonderful job with all of these.
So he actually did okay, believe it or not. But anyway, the moral, the story on that is never encourage your young athletes to hurdle, whether they be playing football or baseball or whatever. So let's talk a little bit about a concussion, and I think I've given you or showed you some examples of what the mechanism of injury is. Again, it's just a force to the brain that it's not designed to take. It's an acceleration, deceleration. A lot of people refer to it as a neurometabolic cascade. There are fluctuations in calcium and potassium that affect the brain after these injuries. And so a couple points I would make. It doesn't necessarily, excuse me, have to be a hard hit. We used to say when we were growing up, you know, you've had your bell rung or a ding, but a concussion is a concussion is a concussion. So keep that in mind as we go through this. About 3.8 million by some studies. I think that's an underestimate of how many concussions. Some people will say 4 million, 5 million a year. So it is a significant injury. And another point that I would make is that there does not need to be a loss of consciousness to diagnose a concussion. As a matter of fact, only about 10% of the concussions that we see are the result of loss of consciousness. These are just some things, and these I will go through these fairly quickly. They're pretty straightforward, but these are some signs that are observed by the medical staff, and these are kind of intended to look at in the acute stage of a concussion, on the sidelines, etc. But the athlete will often appear dazed or stunned. They'll be confused. I think a good question to ask if you're there is just tell me what the last play was. And a lot of times they won't have a clue. It's also a bad sign if you ever see the athlete goes back to the wrong huddle. That's a red flag. It's, you know, maybe something had happened. And then you can have either anterograde or retrograde amnesia. They can't lay down any new memory. And then as far as talking to the athlete on the sidelines, they will almost always tell you that they have a headache, and it's usually a fairly intense headache. Often have nausea. If anybody's, I've had a concussion before, and I'm sure a lot of people in the room, it's almost like a feeling of being seasick or having motion sickness. You're dizzy, your headaches, you're nauseous on the verge of vomiting oftentimes. Sometimes they will complain of double or blurry vision, sensitivity to light and noise. And a lot of times they'll just say, I just don't feel right. So those are some things that you can pay attention to on the sidelines. This is just kind of to emphasize that it takes a while for concussions to recover. And I wanted to mention just the cognitive part of concussions. Something that we see, if a concussion occurs like on a Friday or Saturday and we see them in the office on Monday or Tuesday, it's important to realize that cognitively they're not able to focus, pay attention, study like they have been. And so accommodations need to be made through the school, because you can't just send them back to school and say, you know, you're going to be back to normal. We used to kind of emphasize what we call cognitive rest. We've gotten away from that a bit, but it is important to interact with the schools and make sure that they are at a schedule that's not what they were before they had this concussion. I also mentioned emotion, and as I think Dr. Newman might have said, I spent some time in the Army. We know now that closed head injuries and concussions are certainly at risk to have psychological problems, depression, inattention, and post-traumatic stress disorder is being seen now in a lot of these individuals. So I tell you that because each year we'll have individuals that actually commit suicide after concussion or repeated concussion. So when you're taking care of these individuals, make sure that you focus on that part of it. And then the sleep issue, oftentimes they're drowsy. Some of them sleep too much. Some of them can't get to sleep. But those are some things to kind of keep an eye on. I just want to, I know I didn't want to inundate you with videos this morning, but this is what, if you watch this video, this is why education is important. So, and this, I promise you, this will be the last.
Oh, look at that solid streak. Two down. And we've got, look who's down, too. Oh, boy.
Indeed, the culture of downplaying or glorifying concussion is widespread throughout sport.
Look out. He is out, Billy. He is out cold. That was chin to chin. You're going to see a crash. Oh! And I'll tell you what.
University of Oklahoma basketball star Eduardo Nahara suffered a concussion in this violent on-court collision in last year's NCAA basketball tournament. He lay motionless for 90 seconds, eyes closed, before being helped off the court 6 minutes later.
Your game shortly. Look who's jogging back out. No.
But 14 minutes after the collision, he returned to the gym.
He's going right to check in. I've got him right in. How tough are these two kids?
Nahara re-entered the game seconds later. Even as the CBS announcers questioned the decision, they applauded his courage.
I don't think Nahara should be back in the game. I really don't. He's running with what looks like, he set the solid. The first thing he does is he goes right back to the lead. Well, you talk about some guts now. This is unbelievable.
The moment makes doctors like Herring shudder.
It is not heroic to return to play before concussion has cleared. It's foolish. We need to educate people so they understand that.
All right. So where do we go from here? How do we make it safer for our student athletes? And let me just present this scenario to you. A concussion occurs in one of our student athletes on Friday or Saturday. They call Monday morning and say, you need to see, or that's they should say, can you please see so-and-so, but you need to see, let's call him John. He's sustained a concussion, and could you get him into your schedule? This one say, okay, bring him on in. So John presents himself with his mother and with his father and with his coach to your office on Monday afternoon. And you take the history, and sure enough, John has experienced a fairly significant concussion. He appears dazed to you, very quiet. And guess who does all the talking? The father, okay? The father sits there and says, my boy here is the starting quarterback on Kellum's high school football team, and our championship game is Friday night, and he will be playing Friday night. And it's like, well, I don't think so, or at least I wouldn't recommend it. And so the story I try to tell you is that there is a tremendous amount of pressure on our athletes from sometimes their parents, from their coaches. And what we really need to do is when someone has sustained a concussion, they need to be removed from play, they need to be evaluated, they need to recover from their concussion before they return to play. And so I saw that as a real problem in Virginia, and worked with a lot of different people. And I want to give many people credit because this was a team effort. But we wrote and we introduced legislation, number one, to educate our parents, our athletes, and our coaches, and they must show proof that they have read the readings that we wrote. Okay, so that's part of it. We also put into the legislation that if a concussion was suspected, that they would be removed from play, and that they would be evaluated by a health care provider prior to returning to play. And it's fairly straightforward. As you might imagine, and I'm not going to get into the weeds this morning, it brought people out of the woodwork, a lot of things that we perhaps hadn't thought about that needed to be considered. But at the end of the day, in really a bipartisan way, with a lot of health care providers, a lot of high schools involved, we were able, I think, to provide good legislation to make it safer for our student athletes. And that was actually signed into law and became effective in July of 2011. And I just wanted to mention the Board of Education was very influential. Folks actually here from Children's National were involved in that. The Department of Health, the Virginia High School League, CHKD, which is where I come from, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the Athletic Trainers Association. All of these people participated. This was one of the problems is those of you that take care of concussions, we have here 26. There were 26 different grading scales. It was confusing whether someone had lost consciousness or not, and so we got rid of all that, and now you just have one set of criteria, no more grading. And so it's a lot more straightforward for folks like you and me to take care of folks with concussions. The recovery, the prognosis for concussions, if you treat them well, is actually very good. Most of them will recover in the first week or two. Almost all of them, as you see, by week 3. The recovery, for some reason, and I can't really explain it, takes a bit longer in children than it does in adults. The initial symptoms, the headaches, the dizziness, the nausea, will recover quickly. The cognitive side effects take a little bit longer. I know that you all are well aware of the impact testing that came out of Pittsburgh. That's been a good tool in our toolbox. Almost all of our middle schools and high schools now have baseline impact testing that we can then have the athlete come into our office, we can retest them, and we know that until their cognitive changes improve, that it's not safe to return them to play. And so these are just wanted to go over some criteria that we use. In your office, they should have no signs or symptoms of their concussion. Their neurological exam should be normal. They should have normal balance, and their impact tests and their neuropsychological exam should be back to baseline. And then we work through a progression of return to play. And a couple points, this is 24 hours between each step, so it's designed to take at least a week before individuals can return to play. So if you look at the average concussion, you're looking at a week to get over their symptoms at least, and then a week to go back to return to play. So usually about 2 weeks. Going back to what I said about the scenario in your office on Monday afternoon, that individual is usually, unless there's some exceptions, usually not going to return to play on the next Friday or Saturday. So the first is no activity. The second is light aerobic exercise. Again, these are spaced to 24 hours. Sport-specific exercise, non-contact training drills, full contact practice, and then return to play. So we go in that order, and again, it takes about a week to get through that. So what are we trying to prevent? And I know I'm preaching to the choir this morning, but certainly the long standing side effects that you can, the sequela that can occur from concussions. The second impact syndrome. We lose a couple athletes each year in this country because of second impact. And what usually occurs is the initial concussion happens. They do not heal. They go out and have a second impact, and it's not completely understood, but I think most of you all that are exposed to any neurology or neurosurgery know that we have auto-regulation. In other words, if my blood pressure in my body goes up significantly, my brain can accommodate to that, and the blood pressure will remain the same in the brain. Individuals who have had concussions, if they don't heal, they lose that auto-regulation. So if they have a second injury and they have cerebral edema, the pressure is such, and as you all know, the rest of the story as it is, and so they will end up having an increase in the cranial pressure, and if you don't treat them quickly, they will often either die or be significantly debilitated after that. So the second impact syndrome is important. And then certainly with the chronic traumatic encephalopathy, we know that there are collections of tau, which is the protein. We see the same thing in those with Alzheimer's. And so those pathology slides show the same changes. And again, that's something that we don't want to happen. And we know this because we have had individuals who have been athletes who have contributed their brains for research. We have also had teenagers that have committed suicide after concussions, and so we have that data available as well. So just a couple brief tips. Don't assume that if an athlete did not lose consciousness, that they did not have a concussion. So if in doubt, sit them out. And do not clear an athlete to return to play until they're back to baseline in your office. I just wanted, again, to give credit. This is a picture of Joel Brenner. Some of you may know him. He's the sports medicine doctor at King's Daughters, where I hail from, and he's been very involved in our concussion program. But this is a team effort. This is not something that the pediatric neurologist takes on by themselves or the pediatrician or whoever, but it requires the athletic trainer, the physician, the athlete, and the parent. They need to be part of the team, school personnel, sports medicine, the neuropsychologist, as I said. A lot of these individuals have long-lasting sequelae from the injury, and so oftentimes, in addition to the impact, we'll have formal psychometric testing, and then obviously a neurologist and a neurosurgeon. For those of you that are interested, the CDC has great information. It's a great resource. If you just pull it up and pull up CDC and concussion, you'll see all of these things that I have tried to talk about, and just very good references. And then for those of you that are still taking calls, it wasn't too long ago I walked in the early morning hours to see a patient that had seizures in our ER, and I looked down and saw this individual. This is the father of the patient who had just, I guess, had enough. And so if you think that you're uncomfortable in your call room, then just kind of remember this guy. He pulled up 2 chairs, made himself comfortable in the emergency room. So I just want to, one last bit of advice. It's, I think there are a lot of us that have been around the block, if you will, and I want to do everything I can for our students and residents to make sure that you have the best experience and that you can be the best healthcare providers out there. I think it is incumbent on all of us to find some way in our lifetime, if we can, to give back. And as I tell people, I have worked hard all my life, but I've had a very good life. And if there are things that I can do to give back to society, that's what it's all about. And that's why I get up in the morning. About 20 years ago, I was approached. I was young in my pediatric neurology career in Norfolk, and the executive director of Edmark Hospice called me and said, Ralph, we actually asked your partner first to do this, to be the medical director, but he's got too much on his plate, so he gave us your name. I said, well, that was kind of. Anyway, Edmark Hospice started 35 years ago. It was started by a Presbyterian church in Suffolk, Virginia, and Ed and Mark were 2 children that had terminal illness, and their families wanted to keep them at home during the last few days or weeks of their life, but there was nobody really to help take care of them at their home. And so Edmark Hospice was started. And so Julie called me. I said, Julie, I'll come to your meeting, which I did. And at that time, the census was about 20 terminally ill children in Hampton Roads. And we went through the list, and most of them had cancer. Some of them had genetically determined disorders. And I said to Julie afterwards, I said, Julie, I really appreciate you thinking of me, but this is too depressing for me. I can't do this. And she said, well, Ralph, we really need a medical director, and maybe come back the next month and we'll work through it together, which I did. And the rest is history. I have been the medical director of Edmark on a volunteer basis now for 20 years. Our census, believe it or not, is around 70 now, either terminally ill or critically ill children in Hampton Roads. And I tell you that story because on the surface, and initially when I first joined Edmark, it was very sad, it was very depressing, and it still is, but I can tell you it has been the most rewarding experience in my life, and it has really put my life in perspective. And as you might imagine, this is really, I haven't lost a child, thankfully, but I don't think there's anything more difficult or hard on a family, and that is the loss of a child. And for them to put someone like me to trust me at their time of that difficulty in life has been very rewarding. And so people say, well, you know, being a doctor is hard, being a politician, you're swimming with sharks all the time. But, you know, I kind of of let it roll off of me because I go back and think about, well, you know, it could be a lot worse than what I'm experiencing today. I could be losing my child. So I tell you that because an experience like that, to be able to give back and help people, I think is something that we should all think about doing. And finally, I just wanted to make a point about hope. And even in Edmore, you know, there are times in hospice that there's no hope for the child to live any longer, but there's always hope to keep a child comfortable, to let that child be at home, to be in the loving arms of their family. So the point I want to make to you as I leave you this morning is don't ever take someone's hope away, because when you do, they lose their will to live. And just I'll leave you with this one last story. I do take care of a lot of autistic children. I have learned a lot over the years, but in my early career in Norfolk, I had a mother bring her child in, and I think the child was probably around 2.5 or 3. I can't remember exactly. But I evaluated them. You may have done some testing, but I told this mother there's nothing else I can do to help her. And with 15, if you fast forward, 15 years later, I was in a grocery store, and Miss Slipperhouse is her name. We're very good friends now. She came up to me and she said, Dr. Northam, I don't know if you remember me, and I remember it very well. She said, but you saw my child Logan 15 years ago, and I didn't come back to see you. And I said, I remember that. And I said, I've kind of followed all the things, good things that you've done for autism in our community, and I hope Logan is doing well. But she said, I wanted to tell you why I didn't come back. And she said, the reason I didn't come back is because you said there was nothing that you could do to help my child. So anyway, we are, you know, I think as we see patients every day, we want to diagnose, and that's important to have an accurate diagnosis. But the reason that parents bring their child to see you is they want you to help them. So always take it that next step. The diagnosis is autism, but these are some things that we can do to help you to make your child be able to interact and go to school and be a, you know, hopefully a productive member of society. So I leave you with that thought. It has been a pleasure being back here at Children's National. You all are doing wonderful work, and I look forward to working with you all in the upcoming years. Thank you all so much.
I know many of you will have questions for Dr. Northam, but I think what we'll do, because of time constraints, is that we're going to have a session up in the South Conference Room. And so those of you that have questions, if you could join us there so everybody can get back to work. I did want to make one comment before I make a presentation. I mean, that was just such an inspiring moving presentation and a demonstration of how you can take an idea or how to help people and move things forward into practical applications. I just want you to know that advocacy is part of our mission, along with care and research and education. We have a formal board that governs that. We have Tanya Kinlow. Tanya, can you stand up, please? Who oversees that whole area in government, community relations, and advocacy. We have a special focus on Virginia. Carter, can you stand up too? Carter Beatty, who works with Tanya. And the lieutenant governor said, they trained him down in Richmond and then sent him up here to help us. And, just for example, just so you know, we're working on a situation around the opioid crisis and its impact on newborns, around the neonatal abstinence syndrome, and we're working with our partners down at Mary Washington, Virginia Hospital Center, ANOVA on some legislation. Billy Short is helping, Dr. Short is helping lead that. So if you have ideas, you want to get involved, those were the people. That's why I wanted to bring them forward. And then finally, a tradition, because I notice your tie doesn't really reflect
properly, but we want him, wearing the bear proudly to prowl around Virginia, whether it's Richmond or down in Norfolk at King's Daughters. But anyway, it's just been such a wonderful time to have Dr. Northam back here. I know the residents want you to get up to the call room. Maybe they'll get you into the call schedule. But anyway, that was just an elegant lecture and presentation. Thank you for bringing that information to us. And also thank you for your advocacy and really putting things into action that help children and families in our profession. And then we look forward to the next year or so and working with you in the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.